Meeting. We have had quite a busy summer and we've had our August meeting, which was an addition this year. We've had a lot of events, but it's back to school today with the PSNI, that's what it feels like, but we have a busy time ahead and a lot happening. First, the Chief Constable, unsurprisingly, our discussions today have been very much focused around the resources available for policing. Your recent comments have provided the backdrop to a much broader community discussion around the demands being placed on the service, the pressures on officers, the support they are given, and more generally around the resourcing of the service in terms of available budgets. As a board, we know that we've regularly highlighted these issues. In respect of the pressure officers facing, we have had a lengthy debate on the contributory factors, and ensuring that officers can access service and support when needed is very important. Following last month's publication of the HMIC report on efficiency and effectiveness, we will now be reviewing resources, particularly in the context of the potential impact of the latest budget scenario requirements. So in my mind, there's a very legitimate question to be asked if the latest proposal, if realised, is a cut too far, and if the impact of future capacity and capability will be affected. And indeed, we've had some discussions upstairs about that. There are issues that we will want to explore in more detail today here in the public session. In that we are mindful of organisational resilience and the duty of care to officers and staff, the comments by the Deputy Chief Constable around the level of assaults directed at our police officers is very, very concerning. 2,900 in the last financial year breaks down to an average of 8 per day, and that is very worrying. Next week we are having an event and discussion around why human rights is important for the community and for policing. But just as we expect for the community to have their rights upheld and respected, so too should the officers working on our behalf. The welfare of officers and the resilience of the PSNI are issues that will continue to be a focus for the board. The Police College Review, again, we had a very detailed discussion again upstairs today about how that review is going to be rolled out. But it's been a feature of our meetings fairly recently in every meeting, and as a board we're pleased to acknowledge today that we have now initiated a comprehensive review of the college, but there will be one or two questions on that today. I know you'll be saying more about that and the terms of it and what the short-term operation impacts will be as a result, but we welcome the work that is now going to be progressed and we look forward to receiving the report. Earlier this month we welcomed a significant arms find in Lurgan, and that success has continued with the recent arrests in Larne. Sadly this month the brutal murder of John Ward shocked the community, so if there are any updates in the motive for that murder, then perhaps you can provide us with that. Finally, this is Nicola Mallon's last meeting with us. She's only been with us for a short time, but has been moved to pastures new, so we might indulge with an extra question or two today. But a genuine thanks to her for the contribution that she has made in a very short time with the board. There are a lot of questions today, and most of you will know that our new neighbours across the way is the Belfast Telegraph, and they're moving in today, so I think we need to get started and move on before there's any music or anything else starts, because they're having their moving in party, I believe. So over to you, Chief Constable.
Well, thank you, Chair, and I have furnished you and the board with a formal written report which has also been made public, but I'd like to mirror some of the comments that you have made in your opening comments around the demands on policing, pressure on officers, and the resulting effects of all of that. Policing is a public service, and like other public services across Northern Ireland, we are being affected by budget cuts. So I want to remind you that in the last 5 years alone, over £250 million has been cut from the police budget. The number of police staff has also been reduced by over 300 through the voluntary exit scheme, which was necessary for us to balance the books financially. At this stage, it appears that in 2016-17, as the next financial year, the policing budget will be cut further, possibly by up to 40 million, or just over that. That's 6%. And work is ongoing at the moment in scenario planning for cuts of this scale. Despite budget cuts and reduction in numbers of officers and staff, the demands on policing has not decreased. On a daily basis, police officers and staff have to make difficult decisions about resources. I'd be very clear about our purpose. We're here to keep people safe. That means to protect the most vulnerable, to tackle harm in communities, and to bring offenders to justice. And our resources, however big or small they are, will be prioritised in line with this basic purpose of policing. Regardless of the cuts and changes that may be necessary, I want to reassure you and the public that we will always be there for people in emergencies, in their hour of need, but the cuts will impact what police service delivery looks like. Of the approximately 500,000 calls for service that we received last year, less than 20% of those were related to crime. The majority of calls were linked to vulnerability and potential harm to individuals. And we talk about this term vulnerability, but let me explain to you what it means in very simple definition terms for a police officer on the street. Vulnerability means a person who is in need of special care, support or protection because of their age, disability or risk of abuse or neglect. It is right that we should focus our attention and our resources on people who are vulnerable. It is clear that society in which we live is complex, and it stands to reason that if you're delivering a public service in this environment, it's not going to be straightforward. As police officers, we need to realise that and live with that complexity. Often there is an overlap between what might be a health problem, a social problem, or a community safety issue. That means caring for others. It means dealing with vulnerability, protecting life, and upholding the law. All of that is the current mix of what a police officer might be expected to do in any day. Other public sector delivery partners have similar challenges. We're not on our own in this. That's why the programme for government is now focused on an outcome-based approach to service delivery. And I welcome that joined-up approach to public service delivery. And we as a service will want to work with the executive departments in making that aspiration become a reality. We believe the public will be better served by such an approach. We want to support the individual who is in crisis or who may have a chaotic lifestyle where a number of issues compound to place them in harm's way. More often than not, to do that properly, we need a joined up, multi-agency approach to help such vulnerable people. See, it isn't actually sensible. It doesn't make any sense to have police officers sat in accident and emergency units for up to 12 or even 16 hours trying to look after a vulnerable person who should actually be in the care of a properly trained and qualified health profession. We're not best placed to do that, but every day in hospitals and accident emergency units across Northern Ireland, you will find police cars parked up and 2, 3 or 4 police officers sat there at any time during the day. We need to work closely with our partners to change this reality. And public service providers need to support our political leaders to deliver the substantial changes required in how public service is delivered. Recently, there has been some debate here, probably prompted by my comments on Twitter, which I have apologised for, but actually the serious point coming out of all of that is a public debate around what the role of the police actually is and what it should be. This is a welcome debate, but the debate must be informed on the reality of our budget and our other statutory requirements. Recent inspection reports from HMIC identified that greater resource, more money, needs to be spent and placed into investigating serious sexual crimes and online crimes. And who could argue with that? Meanwhile, the Northern Ireland Executive sponsored Fresh Start panel on the disbandment of paramilitary groups recommends that we should spend more money, we should invest further in community policing. And who could argue with that? The same report recommends that we should prioritise and invest more in tackling organised crime. Who could argue with that? It also recommends that the executive should ensure that the resources are available to fund these priorities. But the same executive has indicated to us that budgets are likely to be cut further rather than increased. We're also, by the way, working hard to meet the challenging targets that we have agreed with you as a board, those priorities that we have set in the policing plan. I'm not complaining with all of this. The role of the police is a challenging one, and we're up for that challenge, but we also need to be realistic. So I acknowledge that all of these recommendations, the policing plan priorities and targets, the statutory responsibilities on me to investigate the past in the absence of any other political solution to dealing with the past are all important. But I also want today to be honest with this board, with the public, and with the political leaders. I need to be upfront and straightforward with you in stating that these increasing expectations and demands cannot be met within the current and likely funding arrangements set for policing this year and in years to come. It's not surprising that the public debate of recent weeks has revealed the negative impact that these pressures and strains are having on police officer and police staff well-being and their welfare. It's having a negative impact on them and their family lives. There is an over-reliance on our use of overtime. You as a board have challenged me on that about our use of overtime. The reality is that we're having to do that because of the lower number of officers than I require to meet these current and future changing and growing demands and expectations. And that in turn is pushing our sickness absence and the stress levels of our officers and staff to unacceptably high levels. We need collectively, as the senior leadership of the police service and as the accountability board responsible for efficiency and effectiveness of policing, to try to square this circle, and I believe that will mean serious engagement with the executive departments to spell it out, not in a complaining way, but in a pragmatic way, in a way that deals with the reality. We can only stretch policing so far with reducing budgets. To support a modern day police officer to deliver their duty requires joined up government. It requires a cross-government, multi-agency response amongst the agencies, with every agency taking responsibility for addressing vulnerability, harm and well-being in society. I want to support political leadership delivering on the programme for government and providing the necessary framework through which public service is delivered. We are not there yet, and we need to make that happen collectively. The police service will not be found to be short in its contribution to the implementation of an outcomes-based approach to service delivery. But despite all of these challenges, I want to assure you, Chair, this board, the public, the politicians, I want to assure you that the police service of Northern Ireland will not be walking away from protecting vulnerable people. That's our job. We enjoy it, we rise to the challenge, and we look forward to continuing to protect vulnerable people and to keep people safe. Thank you, Chair. I'll now hand back to you for questions.
Well, thank you for that. As I've said, the report we got was comprehensive. We've had a fairly detailed discussion on practically all of the items on it. There's one or two issues which we want to take further in the public session. So funding has been underpinning everything I think we talked about this morning. So I'm going to start with a question on funding and with Ryan Feeney, please.
Thanks, Chair. And I think, Chief Constable, your introduction there is something that we're all very concerned about, not least in the backdrop of 217 million of a reduction between 2011 and 2015. So in the private session we got a bit of an update from yourself and the Deputy Chief Constable on the measures that's been put in place to ensure that the PSNI is not handing back money year on year, and we welcome that, but perhaps it would be useful for the public to get a bit of an insight into that. And secondly, just maybe some further comments from yourself on how these reductions are going to impact on people's lives and bread and butter police issues.
Well, I will ask the Deputy Chief Constable to comment on some of the arrangements that we have put in place and the changes to how we manage our finances internally, so that we are making full and best use of the resources that are available to us. Part of the problem with this is people sometimes, their experience is different from the message that they are receiving. So I did say, I think coming up on 2 years ago, that if we continued in this downward trajectory of finance, of budgeting for policing, that policing would be unrecognisable, that people would get different service. So that is maybe too broad a statement, but that has manifested itself in things that this board are rightly questioning us about the removal of a rural crime unit, for example, which was only ever actually 2 or 3 people in a coordinating role to serve as the frontline officers, but nonetheless it has been a casualty of reduced funding. We have gone from 94 neighbourhood policing teams, so that every neighbourhood in Northern Ireland had its own neighbourhood policing teams. We've had to prioritise that down to 36, I think it is, 34, in the most vulnerable and the high output areas. There are other changes to policing that I think we are doing our best with the resources that we have available, but we're having to work differently. We're having to expect more of our officers. The public debate that has played out about the stress and strain that that's causing in officers are all a direct response, a direct result of the reducing budget. But we live in the real world, and all public services are having to deal with reduced funding. I think the answer to all of this is what I said in my opening comments about earlier intervention, a preventative approach, an outcomes-based approach, so that actually we have the best public service dealing with the person in their time of need, rather than the service of last resort, which is often the police service. So it doesn't seem sensible for me, for example, that social services would transfer a number of their current referrals to the police service between 4 and 5 o'clock every day because their service finishes at 5 o'clock. And we have a great working relationship with social services colleagues, but because they're not geared for a 24/7 response, and the police are seen as an emergency service, we ended up being forced actually to take on the management of that risk and that vulnerability. And we're never going to walk away from that, but you know what? We're actually not the best trained, equipped people to do it, because that's not our core business. But we will do our best with what we've got. So I think the fate of policing is going to be changing. I said in my opening comments that everybody is suggesting that we invest more in various areas. We had a 40% increase in child sexual exploitations reported last year. Of course we're going to need to invest in that. There's more crime happening online. Of course we're going to need to invest on that. There's more serious sexual offending being reported to us, so of course we're going to need to report on that. We've got serious harm issues. We have a severe terrorist threat emanating largely from dissident Republicans, where we've got officers working with the Metropolitan Police regarding the investigations connected to Larne and other places. We have lots of other investigations going on, trying to keep people safe in that space. So we're continually stretching ourselves and trying to be agile to move the resource to where it's needed. The unfortunate part for communities and for you as a board is that more and more as that demand changes, it changes to a less visible aspect of policing. So computer experts examining hard drives are going online to identify stalkers and bullying online and child abuse images online and so on are not high visibility, and that they don't do it with fluorescent jackets on the main street. They do it in buildings, and they're doing a great job in keeping people safe. So that's some of the outworkings of the austerity. Your question, I think, Ryan, is around what are we doing to manage what we have got in an efficient way and to make sure that we don't have to end up handing money back at the end of the year. We have streamlined all our processes around that. We have got a tighter grip around that with processes that are run on a daily and weekly and fortnightly basis by the Deputy Chief Constable. Do you want to comment on some of those processes and systems?
Okay. Well, structure around our finance, we've gone very much from a devolved model and devolved responsibility for our budgets. And our experience of that over a number of years is that then devolved budget holders held on to small pockets of money, and when we aggregated that up at the end of the year, we found then we were returning sums of money to the centre, which wasn't sustainable in these years, in these times of far tighter budgets and austerity. So we've had to, in effect, centralise our budgets, and with that then that has also centralised our human resources functions as well. So both money and the people are held at the centre, and that's given us then a good deal more clarity about how we're spending our money. On top of that then I hold a reserve, so where individual commanders may have had more autonomy in the past and certainly did, they now have the availability of coming to myself, my office, and asking for support around particular initiatives, and that does work well. There's very few of these things I do turn down, but I think the actual exercise of filling out a template and asking for the money brings sufficient discipline, because their requests can be set against the priorities of the organisation. And so, in effect, that does weed out some of the requests, and the proposals I get are always, I just have to say, sensible and are linked into achieving the Policing Plan. We do keep a very tight eye on overtime. Stephen beside me here helps with that. He also chairs a particular group which looks like overtime working throughout the organisation. We've already mentioned our dependence on overtime, and in part that is a response to the extraordinary operational pressures that are still visited on the organisation through incidents, through threats, through public order, and through some of the interface and protests that we continue to police. And some of these things are just daily events for us, which are an extraordinary demand that other services in England and Wales would not face in just such a regular basis. And lastly then, every fortnight there's a very thorough examination of where we are with the money, where we are with our performance overall, performance against the policing plan, and really what do we have to do to flex resources around the emergent threats, the emergent issues, but also around our performance against what the board has asked us to do in any particular year. So resources are constantly being checked against what we need to do, one, to protect people, two, to achieve on the policing plan, but also then to make sure that we do remain within budget.
Stephen?
Thanks. Clearly the message that's been given today is a very sobering one, which I think everyone in Northern Ireland needs to take note of and be very aware of the consequences that may flow from this. Beyond the issue just of the scale of resources, could you comment as well on the budget setting process over the coming months and indeed years in particular? I'm mindful that there are at times pots of money that will become available which the police can bid for particular projects and initiatives, which sometimes brings opportunities, but the timing of those can be at odds with the budget setting process of the core police budget over the next 3 to 4 years. And could better decision making facilitate a more rounded process in terms of directing the most resources towards the police as possible?
Yes, well, Mark McNaughton, the Director of Finance, will maybe comment on some of the technical aspects of where we go in our budget planning process and how that links in with the Department of Justice, the Department of Finance and so on. The strategic point that I would want to make is that we do have a number of funding streams. We're never going to complain or turn down a funding stream, but it does become a bit disaggregated, and in terms of strategic financial planning, it's quite difficult. So, for example, we are grateful for additional security funding, most of which comes from London, with a top-up from the Northern Ireland Executive. There are other monies available for tackling organised crime out of the Fresh Start Agreement, and there are other pockets of money here and there that we can tap into, but the main grant is the mainstay of that, and it is important for us that we act on all those funding streams with integrity. That's important to us, that we actually spend the money where we say we're spending it and that we put the resource to it. The real challenge, however, is the lack of financial certainty and the short-term nature of budget allocation. So we're told, for example, and Mark will explain some of the timescales around this, but we know that for the next financial year it's going to be a one-year settlement. That makes long-term financial planning impossible. For us, like every other Chief Constable in the United Kingdom, for example, can, within certain tolerance and parameters, carry money forward from one year to the next. I have no carry-forward facility. As a counting officer, I simply can't overspend. I can't do that. There is no flexibility for real income generation through what's called precepting in England and Wales, where local authorities can put a very marginal amount on local council tax for community safety and policing initiatives. That doesn't arise here. I can't borrow money, and that becomes important around investing and pump priming initiatives and capital spends and so on. So as officially as a non-departmental public body in this devolved administration, the financial allocation, regardless of how big or small it is, because that's a slightly different argument that we would want to make, but the actual allocation, the short-term nature of it, the inability to carry money forward from one year to the next, the inability to borrow, the inability to raise other money responsive to local community needs, all fetters us in terms of the strategic financial planning that you'd ordinarily expect somebody as the chief executive of an organisation of this size to be able to do. And so I think the HMIC report commented very favourably on our financial management within all of those constraints. HMIC as an independent body was actually quite critical in the negative commentary around all of those restraints that are put upon us, regardless of how big or small the budget is. Just the lack of carry forward and income generation and borrowing and so on is something that makes the job difficult. But regarding the process going forward and what the timescales are, Mark McNaughton, do you want to just give some detail around that?
Yes, so I think in terms of practicalities, the Chief Constable's outlined some of our key challenges, and whilst we understand the pressures on the executive budget, just in terms of managing that, struggling with the annuality, with late notification of budgets and lack of carry forward does put constraints on the funding of an emergency service. And just practically, this year that's demonstrated in that we were looking forward to hopefully a multi-year settlement, and just because of all the fluctuations with Brexit, both nationally and then locally, we're now looking forward just to a one-year settlement, and we won't know that settlement until potentially in draft form late December. That will maybe not be concluded until January, February, and so we'll have late notification of a budget really in the mouth of the next financial year, so it makes our strategic planning that much more difficult.
You mentioned, Chief Constable, a reduction in the number of neighbourhood policing teams from 94 down to 34. I know that we're advised by HMIC not yet wedded to certain figures, but the 6963 officers that was mentioned some years ago, if you had that number, would you be able to reinstate community policing, neighbourhood policing teams to the level previously?
Well, of course, what we're trying to do is introduce a new model of more locally based police officers so that we remove that sometimes unfair differentiation that there was between neighbourhood and response, and what we used to hear at the board and engagement with communities and through PCSPs and so on. Neighbourhood police great, response police not so great, if not bad. So what we are trying to do is actually take those neighbourhood policing teams, reduce the number of those, grow what we now call local policing teams, who are the front end service delivery people, and also allocate them to DEAs so that there is some sense of local ownership between those providing the service and the geographical patch that they cover. So whilst I was using the example of the reduction in neighbourhood teams as how policing is significantly changing, it might be an exaggeration to say unrecognisable at this stage, but certainly a significant change in how we're structured. And certainly at community level, when I go and meet people on the street, they're constantly telling me about the great neighbourhood officer they once had, who's now moved on or is now working in a different area or whatever, and of course we regret that, but the change was necessary. The previous model was not sustainable, it was not affordable. If we had the number 6963, say 7,000 officers, then of course that would give us some scope to put more officers into those frontline visible local policing teams and or neighbourhood policing teams, and that's something of course that we would consider. But the point that I was making in my opening comments is we would want to do that. Nobody could argue with that being a good thing to do, but we have a 40% spike in child sexual exploitation. We have an HMIC recommendation telling us we need to invest more heavily in our capability to investigate matters online. We have other increases in demand all over the place. And we have, you know, a requirement under the Fresh Start panel to refocus, to reinvest in tackling organised crime, which I think actually we do pretty well in comparison with other services, and the results that I'm able to report to this board on a monthly basis. I think we do pretty well with what we've got. But we've got all of these increasing demands, recommendations, expectations, and we need to balance out carefully where any additionality would go. I met yesterday for 2 hours with Chief Constable John Boucher, who is leading Operation Canova. Mark Hamilton and I met with him and his deputy on that. And in this year alone, given that we're halfway through the year, he's still building his team, but we are going to be faced with a bill to finance that. And he went through it line by line, and there's no luxuries in there. This is pretty basic stuff. He's going to be presenting us with a bill for that of £1.2 million, which is not budgeted for, not financed for. I've asked the sponsoring departments, whether it's DOJ or the NIO, for additionality to deal with that. It is a legacy issue, and I've been politely declined. Now, clearly, you know, those departments have a responsibility for police funding, and if I get to a critical stage, then I go back to them again, and there's good relationships with officials and all the rest of it. But what I'm saying is that there's the first expectation from the sponsoring departments is go and suck this up and deal with it yourself. Now, you know, we will try to find easements and deal with those pressures, but you're asking me about if there was additional resource would have put it into community policing. I have to say, I'd like to. It's where my heart lies. But actually there's all these other competing demands that would mean that we would need to go through a process of prioritisation to decide exactly how and where those extra resources would go. That said, the way the funding trajectory is and all the indications are that it's going the opposite direction. We've been asked to scenario plan for 3% cuts and 6% cuts. There's nobody inviting us, as you have kindly done, Nelson, to scenario plan for an increase in police officer numbers, and if you can use your influence within government to that end, we would be grateful.
Thank you.
Thank you. And a question, I think still on demand from Larry Keller on the HMIC inspection update.
We were talking earlier on about the HMIC and Colditch, and I think the quote was that they had a good understanding, or PSNI had a good understanding of current demand. But there was 3 other wee points put alongside that, so that was the broad view of your approach to it, which is good. But if I could quote these items, I wanted to just talk about them. It says the PSNI understands most of the demands it faces, but has more work to do with partner organisations, which you mentioned earlier, to understand the impact of new and hidden demand. The other one is the PSNI should further develop it to better understand the hidden or unrecognised demand from communities for visible policing and neighbourhood engagements. And the third one is PSNI faces a considerable challenge to resource unmet demand from neighbourhood engagement, prevention and local problem solving. Could you give some comments on that? As it mentions, all those are tied into the issue of demand.
Yeah, so the core policing demand about what we're dealing with in the here and now that is purely around policing responsibility, what takes up our time, HMIC, Ayrsham, we've a reasonable, or in fact a good understanding of. The bit that we both don't fully understand, and more importantly don't manage the demand as well, is where we have interdependencies and need to be working in partnership with other agencies, primarily other statutory agencies, but also actually the voluntary sector as well. And it sort of takes 2 or 3 or 4 to tango on this one, because we have been pursuing this for a number of years. In fairness to the previous Chief Constable, he went on with this from the very start of his tenure, so we're now looking at about 7, 8 years of the police trying to persuade people to do this collaborative working, collaborative decision making, this working in partnership piece. And it's not just about us wanting to offload burden or demand to other agencies. I've said it many times before, in terms of good partnership working and collaboration, the most important element of it is actually information sharing. Because when we share information, we get a better understanding of what the demand is, we get a better understanding that allows us to predict the demand, and actually the most important piece, and this is where it links back to the HMIC comments, it allows us to take preventative action rather than reactive activity after the event. So earlier, more effective intervention is a more sensible way of dealing with demand. To do that, we need to be sharing information. And actually, there's some glimmer of hope. We've got the high-level programme for government that seems to be talking in that direction, and we need to see how the detail of that works out. We also have under the new local government legislation, community planning arrangements that provides some basis or compels us to work together, although there are still real difficulties in getting information to be shared between agencies, and that's something that we're constantly battling with. We've got good pockets of positive activity in that. I mentioned Derry and Strabane before, but even there, there is a real reluctance between health in particular, but some of the other agencies to share information so that we can sit around the table, understand the problem, and work out which agency is actually best placed to go and intervene in either that individual, that family, or that community to have the best possible outcome. So, you know, the HMIC commentary around what we need to do in that, deepest respect for the HMIC, and we welcome the report, we're very positive about it, but they've written down what we have told them in terms of these are our observations and our frustrations around we can't actually get full appreciation of the demand because we need to have that broader picture from other partner agencies. There are other things as well, by the way, just around more core police demand that we can do more on now. So for example, the movement of criminal and unlawful activity from the conventional geographical space, the tarmac, to online, and how we are realigning our capability to deal with that is something that we haven't been as sharp on as we should have been. So there are some very police-specific things as well, and there's a whole project on understanding demand that we're running at the moment and through in quite a bit of detail, not just understanding current demand, but understanding how it's changing and what future predictive demand is going to be. That will help us then to realign our resources and our capability to meet that demand, because we might need, when we fully understand that, a different workforce mix. Another HMIC recommendation is that we need a more comprehensive and holistic workforce plan. That might mean actually slightly less officers and more specialists brought in the form of police staff. That's one possibility. We also need to be mindful of the fact that for a number of days in the year, we do need to be able to maximise the number of actual police officers we can use with police powers and police training to deal with some of the post-conflict challenges that we're still grappling with. But there's a whole space there around collaboration and the changing nature of demand that we are working on, and very happy to keep the board updated on the progress that we're making on those.
Could I just leave out there for a moment? Chief Constable, because you're talking about collaborative work and you're saying that you don't understand. I suppose the question is from a policing point of view, because obviously you had the only agency involved and it goes also, as you said, past the statutory agencies. You have multi-agency approaches at a local level. You have the PCSPs. At what level are you targeting? I mean, you're going beyond the data protection. So when you say the information sharing, it isn't just the issue around data protection. This is where the net, I presume. So what is there at a strategic level? Are there meetings taking place, for instance, interdepartmental or otherwise, which can put this forward? Because I think you're right. People understand what the problems are. It's a lack of collaboration. Is it a lack of people taking responsibility? And I'm only talking about local level. Maybe a multi-agency approach, or if the PCSPs meet, then it's all the agencies come in, including yourselves. And being in the one room, you can point out a problem and then debate it down. So I'm trying to find out then where is the problem? Because I think the understandings are, is it a strategic level, a high level, or is it right across the board?
Well, I think you're right, Jerry, it's multi-layered. So we have great examples. I mean, the one project, there is a project at this stage that we're most optimistic about, is the concern hub in Derry and Strabane, where you've got health, education, social work, police, all around the table. The actual convener of that is the PCSP. It's a really good example of PCSPs working as they should. And so you've got that at that level, and there's a glimmer of hope that that's actually going to deliver, but you still have things, for example, around the health field at that local level unable to share information about an individual with police unless they've got the person's consent. So the approach that we're taking to that is, well, go and get the consent then. Let's just prove the concept of how, because this isn't about us being Big Brother or trying to gather intelligence from people. This is generally trying to understand their needs so that we can address their needs in a multi-agency way and make life better for them. That's the perfectly straightforward objectives around this. So even where it's working well, there's glitches around data protection and professional conduct and all this sort of stuff that is making it difficult. We've had other initiatives locally based. Anthony McNally, who was the previous Chief Inspector in West Belfast, did some good work with the hospitals and with A&E and children's homes and so on around how we work together to deal with the demand that's created in there. We have examples of young people, teenagers, well capable of looking after themselves, but probably vulnerable by virtue of their age and sometimes a chaotic lifestyle, walking out of the children's home and say, I'm going party for the weekend, I'll see you Monday. The home feel that they have no power to do anything about that other than phone the police. So the police end up chasing that 15-year-old around Belfast, making sure that they're all right. That doesn't feel like a core policing function. It should sit somewhere else. We've got other examples. Sean Wright is the superintendent in Castlereagh and Lisburn. He has developed an information or a protocol really with the health service around this very issue that I referred to, around accident emergency, for example, and how we deal with waiting times there and the impact on police resources. And when somebody's an accident or emergency, 10 years ago, if you went with your sore ankle and got fed up and decided to go home, you had called 3 times and then your name went off the list. If you're called now and the person has left, that's a missing person, that's reported to the police as a missing person. That's one of our 12,500 missing people every year. So we're trying to actually get a more pragmatic, less passing the buck approach to all of this. At a higher level, there's really good work going on in custody with the health service around mental health and really good, strong work. I mean, the amount of people that we have coming into police custody who have mental health problems, addiction problems, real vulnerability, as suspects, but we have a duty of care to them. So there's really good collaboration going on there. That's probably one of the areas where it's most positive, because it's all very clear cut. The police have a right to the information. They've got the custody of the person under law, and actually there are clearly mental health needs, so you don't get the same obstacles around information sharing. I have spoken to the Permanent Secretaries Group about this very stuff. Everybody nods in agreement and says that we must do it and it's the way forward and all the rest of it. We now have it in the programme for government right at the very top level. So there's a layered approach to this joined up working, but we haven't actually landed a great deal of it yet. I say we, I mean all of us collectively, and that's why I've just been very open with the board, and the same with the political leaders and with the senior officials in the departments. We actually don't have the money to keep working in silos. We need to be sharing information, understand the problems, get into a preventative agenda rather than a reactive agenda, and the earlier we intervene, the less money it costs us. And we've all got less money, so it makes sense that we go for early, effective, preventative interventions.
Thank you. Sorry, Nicola. Future, it's related to that. And Chief Constable, I want to say I really welcome the recognition and the emphasis that you're putting and your team are putting on vulnerable people. You're clearly very passionate about it, and I want to thank you and your team for it. And I do think we need to have honest conversations about where the challenges lie in terms of more and better coordinated working across all the agencies. You did reference the fact that, you know, at present, for some of the most vulnerable around mental health and addiction issues, there really is only 2 dedicated safe spaces that they can go to. It's either a custody suite or A&E. And in A&E, you think of the negative impact on the person that's been brought there, you think of the impact on the PSNI resourcing, and then the impact on A&E itself. There is a growing consensus, I believe, that we do need a dedicated safe space to take people where they can seek medical and professional help. I was just wondering where the PSNI might stand on that issue and whether that has featured in conversations with the Permanent Secretaries Group.
The actual specific issue of the place of safety, to be honest with you, I haven't discussed that in the Permanent Secretaries Group, but we have been big advocates for it. Stephen might be able to give some of the background detail that falls under his portfolio, but I agree with you. For people who have mental health issues, have a chaotic lifestyle, even if they have breached the law at some point, accident and emergency or a police cell is not necessarily the best place for them. And if we're about actually trying to solve problems, make people's lives better, still need to be held to account and responsible for their own actions. But a police cell and accident and emergency are really only 2 options at the moment. But this more general place of safety is something that I think I referred to actually in my written monthly report to the board. We've been big advocates for it. It's sort of moving in the right direction very slowly. Steve, is there any other detail you have around that would help?
No, I don't think there's any more detail. The place of safety is under debate at the moment. We have publicly stated that we believe there is a need for a Northern Ireland-based place of safety that doesn't exist. We have people in custody at times, and that is not the appropriate place for them. So obviously we don't have it entirely within our gift, but I know there's new legislation being passed through the Assembly. I know it's under debate, and the PSNI would support it.
Yes, I know you want to come in, but it should be quick because we've got a lot of questions still to get through. You know, so.
Is that on this question or the other?
Did you want to come in on this question?
No.
Right, okay. Right, all right, okay. Well, we still have a number of questions, and the debate is very interesting, and I think it's one we need to pick up at committee or at a roundtable discussion, because we need to go through the questions which people want aired today. So if I move to Ross Hussey, we'll do your question next.
Thank you, Chair. Chief Constable, you mentioned several times the pressure on officers and the welfare of officers, so I have a couple of questions for you here. Given the wide-ranging support mechanisms in place for police officers and staff, what other measures are now needed in order to support staff and alleviate pressure on those suffering from stress and PTSD? And following on from that as well, what resources are dedicated to providing occupational health and well-being support to the organisation? How does it compare with other police services?
A good and very relevant question, Ross, that has been in the public domain in recent weeks, and I did refer to it, albeit fleetingly, in my opening remarks. But I'm going to ask the Deputy Chief Constable, who has oversight of all of these welfare support and well-being arrangements, to answer more fully.
Well, to go to the last part of the question, our occupational health and welfare unit department, it is probably amongst the best within the United Kingdom, certainly in the public sector. It may have its match in the private sector, but it is a very competent unit, and we take great pride in the work they do. Our expenditure in the year will be approximately 2.4 million, and last year they provided 11,000 appointments for officers. The particular issue that arose last week is in respect of stress and the impact of stress on officers, and that's been a growing issue, and it's been reflected in our sickness statistics over the last number of years as well. And they've had actually a growth in staff to help deal with that. So 4 additional counsellors, to provide counselling services, and a clinical psychologist have been employed. And that's to bring down some of the waiting lists, particularly for counselling. There is no waiting list for the clinical psychiatrist that we have available to us, so that gives an idea of just some of the services that are provided. On top of that then, the Federation announced at their annual conference that they were making £1 million available to help top up these services, and that will indeed then pay for further counselling services for officers. And so the waiting list, undoubtedly there's a waiting list at the moment for counselling, but we would say that by the end of the autumn into the winter that we should have whittled our way to pretty rapid intervention by either counsellors funded by ourselves or counsellors funded by the Federation, and we're very grateful for their support. We also offer telephone counselling, which is a 24/7 service, but officers and staff seem to like the face-to-face service better, and there hasn't been the uplift on that service that other police services may have seen. We offer a post-traumatic incident stress management programme, and last year there were 220 debriefs under that programme where officers and staff were in difficult, stressful situations which identified that there may be an aftercare was needed. We also engage with the police treatment centres through the Benevolent Fund. We've helped support the police treatment centres as an organisation. The Benevolent Fund, which is supported by voluntary contributions by police service, by officers, and indeed increasingly by retired officers. Last year we facilitated 260 officers for duty credits for 2 weeks to attend the police treatment centres. So we have done a massive amount of work to try and address some of the long-term sickness issues within the organisation. I feel I'm unable to do justice to all that is done just in a verbal response. And I think if it might be allowed, I would make a written response, and maybe this could be picked up in one of the committees, because the board should be assured of the professionalism of our staff who are engaged in OHW, and our recognition of the issues, particularly around stress in the organisation, and how we've put resources to that, and how we've sought to make counselling in particular, but also other clinical services available to staff.
Thank you for that. I think we should also congratulate the Police Federation for their contribution to that. One issue that comes to mind following that question, clearly a lot of police officers are married. Is there any support given for their partners when a police officer goes through a serious PTSD incident? Is there any support given for either the family or partners?
Well, as part of the overall wraparound package, support is provided for partners, and indeed then other mechanisms, particularly around retired officers, such as the police fund and the PRRT, also support officers as well. But and the PRRT is open to families and dependents to seek support there as well. So there are a number of other services which aren't funded by the police service directly. Police fund and PRRT who do provide support for families. But if we had an officer in suffering stress and aspect of that was into the family and we thought assistance was needed, then we would do that. But these are clinical decisions. They're not decisions that a police officer makes as to the extent of the treatment. These are decisions made by medical professionals, and we don't seek ever to limit that. But the Occupational Health and Welfare Unit, as set up, is to is around early intervention to prevent problems in the first place, obviously, but where there is problems to try and make sure that we can mitigate those as quickly as possible and seek then the early return of officers and staff to the workplace. So even though we spend 2.4 million on it, we feel we get a good return in terms of the services it provides in mitigating sickness in the organisation.
But there's no doubt about that, and indeed, as I say, the reason I ask about the families is clearly that there's a husband and wife scenario, that issue will be brought home with them, and clearly the police is a family and will always be part of that family, so therefore everyone that's included in that should be given whatever support they can. I look forward to seeing your report to the board.
Thank you for that. Nelson, the question.
Thank you. Chief Constable, put down a question in regard to the attacks on Orange Halls over the last 5 years. And I noticed in your response there, 26 attacks this year to date, and we're only just over halfway through the year, 2/3 of the way through the year. And you say also there's been a marked increase in the number of attacks this year. These are very clearly sectarian hate crimes. And it is a sustained campaign that has been going on for a number of years. In view of that, I noticed you said that that to get the full details of that will require a manual trawl of police systems. Do you have some standard system of monitoring hate crime across the different categories of hate crime? And would it not be useful to have that detailed information so that more focus could be put on the issue, and maybe some more thought given to how you get a coordinated response to address the ongoing campaign against halls?
Well, Stephen leads on hate crime for us and has that district policing responsibility as well, so he'll answer that. But clearly, I would just want to condemn the attacks on all of these Orange Halls, and indeed on other symbolic and iconic buildings from whatever quarter they come. It's just an attempt to drag us back and to raise tensions of the past that is unhelpful as we try to build the peace. But in terms of the recording of hate crime and our approach to it, Stephen is the strategic lead for the organisation on it, so perhaps you could answer the question.
Yes, Nelson, and your question obviously asked for statistics over the last 5 years with date, location, nature of each attack, and whether or not someone has been charged with the offence. So that's quite detailed information, and it would take a manual trawl. Our systems certainly do allow us to provide some statistical details. So for example, we have given you there the overall numbers of attacks in Orange Hall over the last 5 years. And it is correct to say that the attacks in Orange Halls have went up this year. The figures so far this year are 26. Now those are operational figures and they may change, and that's up for 16 throughout 2015. So we still have a number of months to go, and we're well above last year. I met with the Grand Master of the Orange Order and the Deputy Grand Master last week, along with other senior members, about this very issue, and I sought to reassure them that this is something that we take extremely seriously. These are hate crimes, but the difficulty we have with the investigation of these is often the nature and the geography involved. There are some 750 Orange Halls across Northern Ireland. The overwhelming majority of them are in rural, isolated locations. And when you look at the types of attack, the majority of them relate to graffiti and relate to the pulling down of flags. Those can be carried out in literally minutes, in the middle of the night, in an isolated location where we don't have CCTV. The halls themselves often have limited and perhaps no security, and often some of these lie undetected for days because of the rural nature. And indeed, when you look at the breakdown across the area, the majority of these exist outside urbanised areas. So of the 26, 5 were in the Belfast area, but 10 were in Mid-Ulster, in a rural location, for example, which just bears out the point I'm making. But having said that, whilst there are limitations, we will exert every investigative opportunity we can. They do get a full response. Where there are forensic opportunities, we will pursue them. We do, as a matter of course, speak to neighbours where there are neighbours, but often the neighbours are a quarter of a mile away. We will look for CCTV opportunities, but they're often non-existent. So regrettably, our detection rate in respect of attacks on orange halls is low. And you know, that I use the term regret purposefully. We do regret that. We do understand the impact that this can have. The Orange Order is a very important part of the Union's community tradition, and these orange halls are often used not just for orange purposes, but for community purposes, and it can impact the local community life. So, in relation to your broader point about hate crime, yes, we keep hate crime figures. I'm very happy to share those with the board. But the detailed drilled down figures that you were looking about a particular type of hate crime and a particular type of victim within a sectarian hate crime category is much more difficult to produce.
If I could just
thank you, Dee. I think it's important to acknowledge that ultimately it is only by addressing the sectarianism that prompts the attacks that you will get to a resolution of this. But in so doing, in tackling that, and that's a societal issue, it's a broader issue than a policing issue alone, although the police have an important role to play. I think the sort of information that I was asking for, that sort of detailed breakdown, where we can actually make people more aware of the scale, the scope, the nature of this, and put the highlight on it, the spotlight on it, put the focus on it, that will expose the sort of sectarian attitudes that prompt these, I think, more fully, and help to address it.
Yeah, well, if you seek the information, then we will provide it. And I just would agree with what you say. This is hate crime. It's founded in sectarianism, and there's a role for us to play as a police service, but there's a role for civic and community leadership as well.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Chief Constable, just to build on Nelson's point, regarding the 750 orange halls in Northern Ireland, there's over 1,500 community groups. So the Salterstown attack in my own area of Macrophel was number 600 attacks on orange halls. Based, if you look across from 1960 to 1980, 24 attacks. From the 90s, 199 attacks. 2000 to 2010, 169 attacks. But the period to date from 2010 to 2016 is 205 attacks. So those attacks is increasing year on year on year. It's not an attack on the Orange Order, it's an attack on the community and the community groups that work within that community. So it's how you as the police service obtain convictions for those attacks, protect our community and build confidence in our community back to be part of the community again, instead of underreporting those attacks, which those attacks figures that I refer to there, I feel are underreported.
Well, the 600 you're referring to is over a 46-year period. Last year we had 15 attacks, which is 2% of halls. So if you wanted 98 halls were on attack, 2 were attacked. This year we're running at about 4 out of every 100 are suffering some form of attack. So the scale of it is really difficult for us because there's 100 halls and 96 are okay and 4 are attacked. And that's unacceptable, the 4 are attacked, and I reassure you that we will and do give a full investigative response. You talk about Salterstown, the one in your own district. That was an appalling attack in which that hall was subjected to a really serious fire and virtually destroyed. I've spoken to the local district commander about that very attack and asked him to go to his PCSP, to seek through the PCSP, to reach out in the community to try and give a united message to the local community in the Mid-Ulster area around how unacceptable this type of activity is. I've asked him to look again at his press strategy and his press coverage and his appeals in relation to that. And we're up for doing whatever we can, but I do want to stress these are difficult issues for us because of all the points I made in response to Nelson about the rural isolation, the lack of security, the lack of neighbours, the lack of CCTV. And I don't mean those to be excuses, but I'm trying to explain the difficulties that we face. But we'll remain undeterred by that and we'll do what we can. And this year, certainly, we have 3 people before the court in relation to the removal and destruction of flags outside White Rock, Orange Hall. But that was a prompt report from a member of the public assisted there. and we have 2 people charged and 1 person report to the PPS. So we won't hesitate where we can place people before the court in respect of these.
Ross, have you a quick, two questions?
A very quick one in response to that again. I mean, there's no doubt that a lot of the halls that have been referred to are community halls. Whilst they may have been orange halls when they were thought they've been used very much in the community. One such example is Straw Ladder Island, which not only was attacked once, it was attacked twice. They came back a second night to attack the hall. And communities, rural communities believe at times the police perhaps are leaving passing and giving passing attention. Particularly when a hall was burnt and somebody comes back for a second bite, you do believe then, well, is anybody paying any attention at all? So therefore that does cause major concerns. But it's not the fact that there aren't halls, I think it has to be added, it's the fact that the vast majority are being used by the community. And it's been used not just by the unionist community, but by the entire community. And that was certainly the case of Straw Ladder Island, which again, as I say, said to come back and have a second bite at.
Yes, well, I'm aware of that hall in particular as well. And you know, we use a full range of investigative opportunities, and where we see repeat victimisation, that opens up a broader range of operational response, and I want to reassure you that we take every opportunity that presents itself. But on a more general basis, when I detected that these were starting to increase this year, we have what we call a control strategy, but if you like, it's a menu of options around how we would deal with an issue from a preventative point of view, an enforcement point of view, an intelligence point of view. And we reviewed that and we refreshed it and recirculated it to all district commanders. Over the core parading season, we commissioned extra patrolling around symbolic buildings, not just orange halls, but those types of premises that have been subject, unfortunately, at times of tensions or parade season that can be attacked. So I want to reassure you, we're absolutely not blind to this. We put a lot of effort into it. Much of what I'm saying to you, I said to the Grand Master and his colleagues last week. I was able to give them a wee bit more detail around the level of investigative response that we're doing. But I accept the fact that these are community buildings, and I've referred to that. But they're at the heart of this is the motivation around sectarianism. We can do what we can to prevent it and detect it, but it's about changing mindsets, and all of us, civic, political, community leadership, supported by the police, all of us trying to change the mindset that allows people to go out and attack these and think it's appropriate. And at the heart of it, unfortunately, is sectarianism.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Roisin?
Thank you, Chair. Chief Constable, I'd like to move to a more visible and community-facing aspect of policing, and that's the body-worn video. The introduction of body-worn video for PSNI officers has been a number of years in the planning and development. If I'm right, the initial recommendation for the use of this as a tool came from the Policing Board's Human Rights Advisor in relation to domestic violence. But over time, supported by the Policing Board and your officers, the current plan rollout is going to be much more extensive for frontline officers out there on the ground. Now, this is a significant expenditure, so I would like some reassurance that the effectiveness from this resource, using it directly from the coal face through to conviction of offenders, will be tracked and reported here to the board and to the public.
Well, it will be. It's got a strong basis in what we call evidence-based policing, and it's a significant investment that we went through the usual governance procedures for, and we'll have a requirement to report back, not just through this board, but through DOJ and then to the now Department of Finance, so you can be assured of that. The detail around that, Mark leads on that for us and has done for a while, so I'll leave him to give you some more detail of reassurance.
Yeah, thank you, Roisin. You're quite right, the rollout has begun. We're intending to roll this out to 3,200 officers, and that commenced in June and will hopefully be concluded in 2018, by which time we also have to have submitted by late 2018 a post-implementation evaluation, which is linked to the approval of the business case, a business case of £3.6 million. which is the maximum sort of headroom within the business case, although I don't anticipate we'll use all of that. Following the discussions we had at Performance Committee, I had a bit of a think about this, and there was some initial discussions about how the post-implementation review would commence. I've paused that so that I can have a further discussion with the Performance Committee about what the board would like to see, just in, alongside the question you've just asked, but also, I mean, I'm also aware that the board have also asked for information about the correlation between body-worn video and stop and search as well, for example. And although the trial in London that the Metropolitan Police carried out, which is the biggest trial of body-worn video, hasn't shown any difference in stop and search, it doesn't mean that these aren't issues that this board can't ask us to monitor over the period of this post-implementation. So I'd like to offer to the board the opportunity to assist in us in the terms of reference for this post-implementation review that we have to do. And certainly if the board can't actually involve itself in it, I will certainly share with them, with you, what we intend to do, and keep you updated as to what we are going to achieve throughout the process. I think it's fair to say that there's all sorts of evidence that I have now seen that around this process, around this purchase, that some of it is contradictory, but the one thing that seems to be highly prevalent through all the trials is that it increases public confidence in the accountability of the police service, and also increases police officers' confidence in accountability. The bits that are not terribly clear is just how much it improves criminal justice outcomes, how much it reduces complaints. Our trials show that it hasn't reduced, for example, incidents of use of force and so forth, but other trials have. So I'm very happy to work with the board on this, and maybe if we could adjourn it for the next Performance Committee, and then I'll write to the board and maybe ask for your views on what you'd like to see in the post-implementation review, and then we'll agree in terms of reference around that, and then I'll keep the board updated as that goes on over the next 2 to 3 years. If that's okay with the board.
Thanks. Thank you, Mark.
Raymond?
Just in relation to that, and I know there was a presentation at the Performance Committee, is see around the public awareness. I mean, and I made the point that the pilot in Derry in Strabane, I don't think it penetrated to the public that it was in operation. I think that's just for going forward, because if you're going to raise awareness around accountability, then it's better the public are totally aware. I think it's similar with the training for police officers, that they just don't see it as either something that just provides evidence in a better way or surveillance in a better way. It is about accountability, it is about public confidence, and that can have as good a role in terms of evidence as it goes forward, rather than just seeing it in the short term. If it doesn't produce evidence, then it's not a good experiment.
If I may, quickly, Chair, we did a launch of this, and I think you're quite right. I don't think it got much traction. We did go public with it, but there will be launches in each area as it goes forward. Again, just from what I've read about and learned recently about other jurisdictions with this, the use of body-worn video by police officers is also helping them with their training. It's helping probationers review their performance, allowing their supervisors to assess their performance in certain scenarios, and then that contributes then to whether or not they should be signed out of their probationary period. And it shouldn't, and it isn't in this jurisdiction just about recording everything. Some of the other studies have been carried out in America where officers record all the time. That won't happen here. This is about recording specific incidents where police officers would normally make a note in their notebook, and not about carrying out casual surveillance of the population. Whenever they download this, and they have to download every day onto a piece of software, unless they decide to save an incident, it's automatically, their software deletes within 31 days. So we're not keeping stuff that's unnecessary. So it has to be a very active process from a police officer to decide that which he or she needs to keep and refer to. And it doesn't replace evidence gathering, it doesn't replace their notebook. It's a complementary tool.
Did you want to come in on that question, or a separate one? Can we go to Wendy, and then, since you're leaving us, we'll leave you to that. There's just 2 more questions, if you can bear with us. Thank you.
Chief Constable, in relation to the impropriety involving student officers at the Police College at Garnival, This has been a matter of public interest and concern, and indeed this board has emphasised the seriousness of this, one being one of public confidence in both the training process and the integrity of those involved. Over the last few months, we have had robust dialogue within the board and with you, Chief Constable, about this issue, not least in including our meeting today. Can you outline what steps you have taken to address this issue, and what reassurance would you give the public that student officers leaving Garnerville are fit to serve?
Well, I have every confidence in the quality of people that we are recruiting, assessing, and who are graduating from Garnerville and going into communities, not out of some blind wishful thinking, but because of what I see. I spent Sunday afternoon on the ground across North and West Belfast. I met several officers who have graduated in the last year or so from Garnerville, and their understanding of their community, their dedication to public service, and the reports from their supervisors tell me that these are people who are learners, they're responsive, and they're exactly the sort of people that we would hope would come into the police service. So I do have a high level of confidence. I also acknowledge that we did have a practice within the police college back in May, June, that gave us some cause for concern around the propriety of how some officers were preparing for examinations. It did give us cause for concern. There were a number of systemic issues around, for example, the extent of the examination bank, the fact that officers, not officers, student officers were encouraged to prepare their own practice papers, to work in action learning sense, all the same things that my teenage children do at university and are encouraged to do at university. The problem was that they went a step too far in that they attempted to memorise some questions that they had in live examinations so that they could share them to help with any of their colleagues who had to do reset examinations. Some would say that that was good teamwork and that was creative. That argument for me does not hold any water, because they signed a confidentiality notice that said that they would not discuss the content of examinations outside of examination conditions. So therefore, that warranted, in my view, especially given that these were potential police officers, and integrity is pretty important and all of that. So there was a disciplinary sanction of a formal written warning given to anyone who had been involved in that. We were satisfied that the student officers had been open and forthright in their practice, and there was an expression of regret from many of them. I thought that was a proportionate sanction, but actually that discipline sanction is only one half of the story, because the course and the examinations are accredited by Ulster University, and all we did was engage with the university around that to establish what would the normal practice be if there had been some sort of impropriety on a module or a course held at, on campus at Ulster. It was clear that the person, or the people deemed to have not been acting properly would simply not receive a pass in the examination, and therefore they would either need to reset the module or do something different with their lives. And so we applied that same academic consequence to any of these student officers who had benefited from this practice. And so a number of them were given the choice to either leave or go back to week 1 of 22 and redo the training course. This was a judgment call. It was made by me personally. I know it has been the subject of rigorous debate and scrutiny from the board. I welcome that, even though it may not always be comfortable. And as a result of the concern raised here at the board, we have set a very clear terms of reference for a short-term review that will be conducted over the next 4 or 5 weeks. And the findings and the recommendations of that review have now been agreed with the policing board, and the report in its entirety will be presented to the board by the end of September. It is being led by the head of police training for Scotland rather than internally, although he will be supported by some internal people not directly connected with current training arrangements. And it will look at things like the validity and verification of the exams process, the content of the course, the culture within the police college. It's quite a broad ranging review. That will report by the end of September, and we have taken the decision not to bring further student officers into the college on the suggestion of the policing board, and concurring with that suggestion until we get the outcome of that review, see what it's telling us, and allow some time. No doubt there will be findings and recommendations that will require attention. Allow ourselves a window to address those in a way that restores confidence of the practice and policies of the training college, both for me as Chief Constable and for you as the policing board. And only when we have that done will we be in a position to reintroduce officers into the training programme at Garnival. So that means, for example, that the intake for September, October and November will not happen. We will introduce an extra intake in December, provisionally, depending on the outcome of the review, but that allows us a big enough gap, a window, to get the report, to consider those findings and anything that needs fixed, either to fix it or to review the decision about further intakes of student officers. That, I'm glad to say, seems to have met with concurrence from the board following some lengthy discussions about what would be required to restore confidence in the training regime at Garnival.
Thank you, Chair. Really my question relates to the proposal for the new online firearms licensing process, and really it's to seek confirmation as to whether the PSNI has fulfilled its statutory obligation under Section 75 to consult with the public in a genuine and meaningful way regarding the development of policy.
Alan, do you want to take that?
Nicola, thanks. I know I was put through my paces in this by the Performance Committee last week, and I went right to the chair with full details, and not everybody was going to be there. In the synopsis, we know that the system is broken, and you've heard lots of conversation around this table today about the pressures in the organisation and the need to think better and differently. And if there was ever an example of that, it's our proposals around the new firearms licensing online system. I know that we have had some criticism from some of the stakeholder groups. We did start to talk to groups last September, October around an online system. The vast, in fact, almost exclusively the support for the introduction of that system was positive. Where we had a parting of the ways is when we took a decision, out of necessity as much as anything else, to the design and the pressures to make a wholly online system and not a partial online system. And that brought about some dispute between some of the stakeholder groups and indeed ourselves as an organisation. We don't consider this to be a significant policy change. We see it as a business process change. Notwithstanding that, in the sort of spirit and application of that, we conducted a full Section 75 screening exercise on the basis of that. And it did raise, through a number of stakeholder groups, some of the issues that board members will be familiar with around a small but not unimportant number of people in rural communities who may potentially be disadvantaged. Of course, I always put that in the context of this is something we do once every 5 years, not something you do all the time. But that doesn't mean it's not important. So what we've done is taken those issues identified in the Section 75 screening arrangement, and we are now engaged on a longer term mitigation plan to see how we best mitigate those pieces that we've identified under the Section 75 screening piece. We have shared the outcome of the Section 75 screening exercise and the paperwork with those bodies who are our critics. And it's fair to say that what they have responded back to us are identifying the same issues which we identified for ourselves in the screening process, so we're not identifying any gaps in our process to date. And we are looking forward and are inviting those groups to continue to work with us going forward, as some of those groups indeed are, that we get to a better place where we seek to mitigate the issues identified, but also seek to introduce an online system which is by far better than we currently have for the vast majority of firearms licence holders on that.
Just very quickly, why I think there's some confusion there is that I think it's the first question in the impact assessment asks who will be impacted on by this change of policy. I think that's what's driving people to say then there should be a full public consultation.
I'm sure that's right, Nicola, and we do have, you know, like I said, we didn't consider it to be a policy change, and we could have taken that decision and then sought not to Section 75 screen it. I think that's against the spirit and intention of Section 75 legislation. So whilst I have been a little bit hoisted by the petard of the current structure, we have nonetheless, I think, been fair, open and transparent, and indeed within the spirit and letter of the application process, which I think is the right thing to do.
Okay, well, that concludes the questions, and I think we've covered everything. I know we were longer than usual, but many of the questions did merit fairly detailed answers, and thank you for that. And thank you all for your patience. We meet again on Thursday the 6th of October, and I believe we'll be having the Director of the NCA, the Director General, here in that day.